I want to introduce Matthew. So please, let me hear an applause for him. Bring it on.
Thank you very much. Hello, Sia. Thank you, Cousin. Okay, that's all I can do. Welcome, thank you for coming. It's really nice to be here and see everyone and be with you. So thank you for coming to the conference. Okay, metrics at every flight level. It's a bit of a mouthful, but hopefully I'll be able to explain a bit about what this is in the next 40 minutes, 35 minutes. Right, okay. Has anyone ever been part of an agile transformation? You've had it done to you or inflicted upon you, maybe? Yeah, I've been on the receiving end. I've unfortunately been on the inflicting end as well. So there's something I call the big picture up front. It's kind of like big design up front. And it's when a consultant or someone hands you a nice, pretty picture of what the future could look like. It looks maybe something like this. This looks pretty cool. I don't know, I'd like to try this. It looks pretty simple. Really, you just kind of drive up and you go to the top. The problem with the big picture up front, though, is that it lacks context. It works in the picture, of course, but it really doesn't necessarily have anything to do with our particular organization. It's kind of like trying to swim on dry land before you actually get in the water. Yeah, you can swim, but what happens when you get in the water? It's kind of like the organizational equivalent of works on my box, right? So what happens when we actually put this thing into production, or try to put it into production? The reality is often something much more like this. This is the unfinished cathedral in Bermuda, and they had great plans for this building. Their former church was destroyed, and they said, well, we want to build it better and really make it awesome. They ended up running out of money and having a lot of squabbles among themselves, among the leadership. And I think this is what happens to our organizations a lot of times, too. We have a hard time thinking about how can we rebuild ourselves or scale ourselves without a picture, without one of these off-the-shelf things, and ultimately we end up like this. So I'd like to propose an alternative to the big picture up front, transformation, and basically it's around this concept of managed evolution. So if you think revolution, evolution. So I'm going to be proposing some tools, some ways of thinking to help us toward managed evolution. So I'm combining three things, three concepts, if you will. The first one is flight levels. Just show of hands, who has heard of the concept of flight levels? Okay, a few. I know I met someone from Austria last night. Basically, this comes from a person who is based in Austria, Klaus Leopold. He is coming from the Kanban community. So I'll explain that in just a bit more detail. The second thing is this concept of leadership at every level. So it's maybe thinking about the difference between a leader-follower culture and a leader-leader culture. If you've read some things like David Marquet's book, Turn the Ship Around, some of the things he talks about, that's what we're going to be talking about there. And then finally, a metrics cube. So 3 dimensions of metrics. So we're going to put them all together. I don't know, we'll see what happens when we put them all together. I don't know if it's like a Reese's peanut butter cup when you put the chocolate with the peanut butter. It turns out positively. We'll see how this goes. So first, flight levels. So I mentioned Klaus a minute ago. This is how he describes it. Basically, it's a thinking model that helps you find out where in an organization you have to do what in order to achieve the results that you want. So it's not a framework. I want to make that very clear. It's not something you install in your organization and your teams. It's a thinking model. So if you don't want to think, then this may not be for you. If you like to think and you like to have challenging problems, but would like a little bit of help with that, That's what we're talking about here with the flight levels. So in an organizational transformation, where do we think we have the most leverage for actually doing what we propose to do when we talk about an agile transformation or organizational transformation? A lot of organizations just say, start with the teams, agile teams. Anyone on an agile team? Agile delivery team, maybe? OK, great. That's good. We need people to actually do the work. Value streams help us coordinate the efforts of those teams. Anyone use value streams in the organization? Part of a value stream? At least one person? OK, good. The strategy, the way we think about the organization holistically is going to give us the place where we have the most leverage. What happens is these things are often disconnected. We might have these elements in our organization, but they're disconnected. And so for us to actually succeed, we need to have a connection, a coherence between all three of these areas of our organization. So as Klaus says, organizational agility is not about having many agile teams, but rather it's about having agile interactions between the teams. Maybe you've seen this diagram, maybe you've experienced it. If you're working in a delivery team, you might be in the middle there, the dev bit. Maybe you're doing something every 2 weeks, and then you go on to the next batch of work, and someone's giving it to you, and then you're giving it to someone else. You don't know where it goes. You don't know where it's coming from, but that's your job, and you're agile. Unfortunately, this doesn't really change anything. This is what we would call a local optimum, right? So all the good work that's being done in those agile teams is being undermined or undone by the fact that the rest of the organization, upstream and downstream, are not having flow. So the concept of flight levels then gives us a sense of elevation, where we want to see parts of the organization. So if you think about having special lenses, special goggles that you can see the organization at different levels, that's what flight levels helps us to do. So at the very lowest level, you might think of the garden level. We have the butterflies. They can see in great detail, but not much breadth. As we go up to the bird's eye view, we can see things as they work together, up and downstream, managing and thinking about flow end to end. And then thirdly, the highest level is the strategy level. So the idea is that the higher you fly, the more you have an overview, but fewer details. So what this looks like in practice is basically connecting all of our boards, making all of our work visible, and connecting it up and down the organization. So at the operational level or the team level, we think about just our boards. So anyone use any kind of a board, whether physical or digital, to manage your work? OK. Chances are you're working at the team level or the operational level. There may be some of you who are working at the higher levels. What we don't often see, though, is how our work connects to the other work, the work upstream and downstream. Not to mention a higher view of how everything's flowing across end to end. So what happens, and we'll talk about metrics in just a bit, but we optimize for the things that we can see. We optimize for our team view. Level 2 is we think about the value stream or the coordination level. So it's really being able to connect all of those things, whether they're multiple teams working on one thing, upstream, downstream flow. It's really managing flow end to end. And then strategy is basically helping us see the big picture, declaring the why and the what without bothering with the how so much. So think of these as levels of abstraction rather than organizational hierarchy. So you might think of them as helping us to understand what activities we need to be doing. So prioritizing, managing end-to-end flow, and actually delivering the work. OK, second, leadership at every level. So maybe you've thought of this as alignment and autonomy being two opposite things, opposite poles of the same spectrum. The idea of aligned autonomy, which really supports the idea of leadership at every level, is thinking about these things as not opposites, but separate concerns. So we might redraw this as two separate axes. So it's possible to have high autonomy and high alignment in the organization. So if we kind of map some organizational types onto this, we see maybe you can think about your own organization, where it might fit into this, the spectrum. So organizations that are low on autonomy but high on alignment, we might think of those as conformist, authoritarian cultures, micromanagement cultures, where we're seeing too much alignment without autonomy. I've worked in a few startups over the years, and a lot of times the startups end up being this high autonomy but low alignment area in the red. So this highly entrepreneurial, often chaotic. We really want to aim for the upper right-hand corner. If we think about flight levels then, on top of this, we think about in the high alignment but low autonomy quadrant, the authoritarian conformist area. Oftentimes, those three levels of flight levels are confused, or they're all operating on the same level. And that's where you have people at the higher levels of the organization getting too much into the weeds, focusing on intervening with the teams rather than focusing on declaring strategy and vision. Oftentimes in the entrepreneurial chaotic, we don't even think about strategy so much, or it's so disconnected, we might not even have level 2 coordination. So we really want to think about, if we want to move toward the innovative collaborative organization, we want to think about creating these flight levels and keeping them in their proper positions, proper relationship. So here are some things that, to me, describe these types of organizations and the kind of behaviors, especially as we think about metrics. So the authoritarian conformist organization, really focusing on activity-oriented metrics. Think about outputs, compliance. Has everyone done the agile training? Standardization. Are we all using the same tool? We can't have multiple tools. We need to use the same tools. Things like cost utilization. Those tend to be the areas of focus for those types of organizations. Entrepreneurial chaotic organizations, as I said earlier, they may not have a clear vision or a connection to their strategy. The amount of work in progress is really kind of invisible. We can't see all the work that we're doing across. We have silos of teams. Oftentimes there's redundancies of tools that people are using. So it's kind of the opposite problem of in the upper left. There's lots of tools, but we don't even know who's got the, oh, you figured out this problem too? Oh, well, we've had that problem too. It would have been nice to know that you solved that. Right. And as I said, redundant and unshared work. There's not a lot of communication across the organization. So when we think about the innovative collaborative organization, we think about, even at the highest levels of the organization, limiting work in progress. In all my years of working, consulting, working in organizations, one of the things that really hurts knowledge workers the most is overburdening, and that comes from too much work in progress. In this area, we want to think about connecting things and deploying knowledge across. So there's the Japanese lean term called yokaten, which is sharing across, bridging, not necessarily imposing best practices, but sharing good and emerging practices for others to be aware of. Oh, you solved that problem. How'd you do it? That sort of thing. The idea of linking our boards, linking our Kanban boards, that creates that transparency that we want to have. So the Kanban method talks about this idea of leadership in this way, encouraging acts of leadership at every level, from the individual contributor to senior management. So a lot of us think about the traditional model of organizations, organization hierarchies, the leader-follower. I have a boss, that person has a boss, and so on. I might have people who report to me. The chain of command is strong in these organizations. The problem is, people won't do the work unless they're told to do the work. They don't have visibility of what is intended for the organization at the higher levels. So unless someone's actually telling you you need to do this, there won't be action, there won't be any sort of movement from the rest of the people. So if you think about turning that upside down and moving to a leader model, whether or not your actual structure looks like this, the idea is that we reduce the barriers to communication. We encourage connection across leaders, and we empower people to do their work according to what they understand the vision of the organization to be. So it's really the ability to inspire others through examples, words, reflection, but also trusting people to get the job done. The Agile Manifesto talks about that in one of the principles. That's a couple decades old, but it's what we want to aim for here. So kind of a quick decision filter to think about, are we following this leader model, or do you have that culture? If you can do something about it, just do it. State your intent and act rather than seeking permission. And it's better to try, even if you fail, than to not attempt. So I know a lot of us are aware and practicing the idea of psychological safety. Psychological safety is the underpinning for this. What happens when you try something and fail? What happens when someone in your team, maybe you're a manager or a leader, how do you respond to that? So you can start with your own practice. Okay, third. I'm just trying to be funny. It's not that funny. The Rubrik's cube of metrics. So the idea here is that we want to think about 3 dimensions of metrics when we think about supporting leadership at every level and flight levels. So first off, the first 2 dimensions, the first 2 faces of the cube, combine perspective. So we have an internal view of our work and an external view. So the external view is our customer. What does the customer want from us? We also have concerns about how we work internally. Both of those things are valid things that we need to have metrics for, measurement for. So you might think about the idea of building the thing right and building the right thing. So is this what people want? And is this how we want to be building things? The other part is the delivery aspect. So this idea of the product is really the what, but people care almost as much about the how, the service delivery, as they do the product. So if you think about going to a restaurant, for example, obviously you choose a restaurant based on the food, the wine, the drinks, whatever, the atmosphere, but you also care about how you're treated. What's the service like? If I make a reservation, is the reservation honored? That sort of thing. So if we combine these 2 things, we have questions that we want to answer in each of these areas. So is our team healthy? So internally focused, but how are we working? How are we delivering? Is our product healthy? So think about internally. Is our product, is it extensible? Is our code in good shape? From the external perspective, the customer's view, is the service delivery fit for its purpose? So this is where we think about the idea of fitness for purpose. Is our product fit for its purpose? Is it why people have bought our product? How does this look like in metrics then? Some things like psychological safety, I mentioned that. Engagement, a lot of people are thinking about employee engagement. That's a really useful internal view of are we healthy as a team, as an organization? We think about the product, some of the internal workings of products. I know a lot of the talks this week are talking about this. And then external view. So how long does it take to get my stuff? Do our due dates mean anything to you? Do we actually deliver on time? How much stuff do we deliver? That's throughput. How long does it take to get service restored? These are all things that customers usually care about. And then from a product standpoint, the what, we might think of things like this. So I'll keep going here. So those are the 2 dimensions. We're going to add a 3rd dimension, and that's the flight levels. So the 3 levels of the flight levels, operational, coordination, and strategy. All right, we put them all together, and it gives us a cube. I'll go a little bit quickly here, but really just thinking about the activities, as I mentioned earlier, the thinking that we do about strategic vision setting, what are our KPIs, that's going to be at the strategy level. Project management, product management, that's usually at the coordination level, end-to-end work. And then the team work, as I mentioned earlier. So here's what it looks like. The idea here is that we want to combine these things so that we have coherence across the organization, what's working together, so that we're not doing something in our team that's completely decoupled from or unimportant from what's most important for the organization. So going back to the organizational types, how many agile teams do we have might be a metric, but how does that actually fit into our organizational strategy for product and service? So for example, we think about the internal workings of our code, our product health. We might think of these things. End-to-end delivery time. That's a concern at level 2 from an external perspective. And then another example is market share. So this idea of coherence matters because we need to be able to map tightly how these things connect across all 3 levels when we think about flight levels. So here's an example. So if we care as an organization about our Glassdoor rating or retention, people stay with us. We don't have to spend a lot of money recruiting, hiring, training people. Then that's going to be a strategic level concern. So we might invest in improving our employee experience. That's a strategic approach. From there, we might think about value streams, multiple teams working together. What's their overall engagement score? That can be a lead indicator, whereas retention is a lagging indicator. Something like employee engagement is a leading indicator. And so the farther we go up towards strategy, the more lagging those indicators are going to be. The more leading indicators are going to be closer to the team, such as psychological safety score. We can actually measure this. I don't know does anyone in the room measure your psychological safety? Either yourself or your team? Okay, 1, 3, all right, awesome. Maybe next year we'll have like 6 people doing it. So it's really helpful. As a leader, I do this with my teams. I actually do it for myself. Once a month, I take my own safety assessment. Just how safe am I in my organization? Total motivation score. This is another approach to understanding how are employees doing. So some of us have used like team happiness in the past. Okay. Some of these things actually are a little bit more helpful in understanding what's really actually going on for our employees. Okay, so what does this look like in action? So typically, we have people asking a lot of questions, and if we're focused only on agile teams, these are the kind of questions that people are going to be concerned about. So again, thinking about that conformist, authoritarian organization where the levels are kind of mixed up, the executives, the managers are kind of too much in the weeds. So they're asking things like, how many agile teams do we have? How many teams are agile? Why isn't it everyone on Jira? And how much are these agile teams costing me? Right. So those are questions that are too low level for what they should actually be thinking about. But they lack a way of thinking about what am I meant to be doing, and so on. You can see some of these things. Managers may ask, I don't know if hopefully you don't work in this kind of organization, but why is Team A's velocity lower than Team B's? If I'm a manager now, how do I monitor someone's performance? I used to be able to do that. Now how do I do that with these agile teams? And so on. You can even see at the team level, the concerns really aren't related to something that's important or valuable to the organization. How many stories did you complete? Or what are we doing with these ceremonies? Do we actually need to do them? We need to comply with our Scrum thing. Why? And what's our velocity? So the idea here is that we want to help our leaders, help everyone in the organization work at the right levels and expressing those things in a measurement way. So a leader who believes that he can make a difference, he or she, a positive difference through continual personal interventions, is usually deluding himself. He thereby takes over things that other people are supposed to be doing, effectively dispensing with their efforts, and multiplies his own tasks to such an extent that he can no longer carry them all out. The demands made on a senior commander are severe enough as it is. It is far more important than the person at the top retains a clear picture of the overall situation than whether some particular thing is done this way or that. It's a long quote, but I bring it up for us because it's actually from the 19th century, a Prussian military commander. So This is not a new problem for us, but we still have it going on in our organizations today. So some feedback loops that we might use to understand our fitness for purpose and these various aspects of the metrics cube. So strategy reviews, operations reviews, and then service delivery reviews. So if you're doing retrospectives, those are helpful. Those typically relate to our internal team health. The service delivery reviews help us understand more quantitatively how are we doing towards our fitness of our service delivery. So you see some examples here. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but all that to say is that there's different things that are working at different levels, but they're all connected. And so we need to have that coherence. Typically, I mentioned earlier, we have our work on boards. We have lots of work in progress. Usually those are displayed, but they're limited to our own boards. We don't quite see the full picture, certainly not at the organization level. When your organization is continually spinning up initiatives and saying, we need some more teams, or our existing teams, you should do some more work, that view of our organization is lost. And as I alluded earlier, I really do think that most of the pain and suffering that people do who want to do good work, it's caused by overburdening. And the idea of limiting work in progress, it's important at the team level, but it's even more important at the higher levels of the organization. So Klaus has this expression to say, we want to limit the work where we want to see the effect, the value, and the benefits of WIP limits. So I would propose to you, wherever you are in your organization, to think about limiting your work in progress to relieve overburdening, to increase predictability, to increase quality and outcomes for your people. Mentioning the idea of engagement, that's going to have a positive effect on your people. All right, another quote from von Moltke, the higher level of command, the shorter and more general the orders should be. So this is the opposite of micromanagement, right? We're allowing our leaders to operate at the proper levels of the organization. The next level down should add whatever further specification it feels to be necessary, and the details of execution are left to verbal instructions. So this is, if you think about military action, it's really this idea of conversation. We have that concept in Agile too. Or perhaps a word of command that ensures that everyone retains freedom of movement and decision within the bounds of their authority. So instead, the questions might be more like this. These are more appropriate when we give our leaders in our organization the framework of thinking, the system of thinking, to understand where should I be working and not working. So what do our customers value? What do they care about? Why are we even doing this transformation? How are we going to assess the success of it? And even at the lowest levels, the team levels, are now thinking, what do our customers value? That's why we have this idea of coherence up and down. So it's important, again, this is not a framework. It's not something to install. It's really a means of communication, thinking about where to have the right conversations, where to be thinking about measuring the things that matter at each level. So Klaus says at flight level 2 and 3, that's the coordination and strategy level, it isn't about the board. The system represents the points of communication. So ultimately, what is this going to do for you? So I've used this in the work I've done with organizations, my own organization, to help us communicate the following things. How my work connects to and impacts the organization's purpose. We heard earlier about the importance of intrinsic motivation, mastery, autonomy, purpose. What is my purpose? How does what I do every day make a difference? How are things different because I came to work today? Where to provide the most leverage? For those of us in the organizations where we're working at the management level and above, where do we create the most leverage? What are the right questions to be asking? We talk a lot about experiments. I had a workshop yesterday about experiment design. How do we measure the importance and the impact of our experiments? How do we even know what we should be experimenting with? And finally, the minimal amount of specificity, going back to von Moltke, talking about as a leader, what do I need to be caring about and not caring about? What's the minimal amount of specificity that I need to provide in order to help others make aligned decisions? So a few takeaways for tomorrow, or maybe next week. Hopefully you're coming to the conference again tomorrow. So really take that lens, take that special goggles that I mentioned earlier, and start modeling all the things that happen in your organization. It can actually be a really helpful exercise to do this, and you realize there's a lot more going on in the organization than you think is actually happening. So model all your services. They don't have to be official services that people are paying for, but someone wants in your organization. They could be internal, they could be external. Agree on organizational goals. And again, wherever you are in the organization, what are the goals as far as you see them? Identify those metrics. So what are the things, the leading indicators, lagging indicators? Use that, the Rubik's Cube of metrics, those 3 dimensions. And then here's the key, and this is to ensure that all work and the metrics are connected to the top. Right? You shouldn't have any orphaned metrics or orphaned projects. And then use those cadences I mentioned, strategy review, operations review, and service delivery review to inspect and adapt. So here's some further reading if you're so inclined. And I think, do we have time for questions? I see 0, so maybe not.
Thank you so much, Matthew, for this very nice speech.
Good, thank you.
Let's see what the audience asks us. So I wonder if they can help me with the Slido. Okay, meanwhile, this is happening, but you have a question. It's like, regarding the psychological safety, how you normally measure when one person is burned out?
Yeah. So measuring burnout, it's maybe not quite related to psychological safety. I mean, you can think of psychological safety as maybe a leading indicator for that. There's actually a separate group of questions that I take from engagement type of questions that help you understand burnout. So, I mean, partly there's just asking people, and usually we want to do this anonymously to provide safety. But part of the goal that we can do as leaders is to actually just create a pull system, and that's the benefit of using a WIP limit at every level of the organization. Is it reduces overburdening because by definition people are not taking on more work than they ought to. So a couple ways to do that.
Awesome. Well, we have one.
Okay.
Well, they copy-paste my question here.
Yeah. Yeah. So again, you can create your own questions. I know Amy Edmondson has a site that's one I use. There's other tools that you can use. The key, though, however you do it, is to do it anonymously. You really can't understand someone's psychological safety if they're in an unsafe situation. And you're like, how safe do you feel? Well, if they're not safe, you're not going to get reasonable answers. So doing anonymously, however you do it.
Great. Just wait for me 1 second. From the Craft organizer, I want to thank you, Matthew, for your wonderful talk at Craft.
Thank you.
Let's make an applause for Matthew again, please.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.